मिनिस्ट्री है वो भी साथ में लगी है। देश में कहाँ कहाँ हम बेस्ट को इम्प्रूव कर सकते हैं, स्ट्रेंथ को इम्प्रूव कर सकते हैं। तो जो पहला ब्लॉक मैंने विजिट किया था वहाँ 240
গোটা গোটা গেল ভালো হবে নাকি করোনা সময় ভালো না কি হল হ্যালো হ্যালো বেশি আগ্রহ করতে হবে वाईफाई कनेक्ट किया कि कनेक्ट है हाँ
वहाँ के नेट में प्रॉब्लम होगी कई बार
डिस्प्ले में उसको देखें
बोला Not yet.
I will immediately hand the floor to the Director General for his welcoming remarks. DG, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tim. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all member states, and thank you for joining us once again. Around the world, cases of COVID-19 have increased for the 9th straight week, and deaths have increased for the 6th straight week. While we have seen small declines in several regions, globally, there were almost as many cases last week as in the first 5 months of the pandemic. Many countries are struggling with intense transmission, which illustrates the vital importance of a comprehensive and consistent application of public health measures alongside equitable vaccination. The current situation globally illustrates the importance of fully funding WHO's 2021 Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan. Last week, I stressed the importance of flexible donations, which allow us to deploy resources to where they are needed most urgently. To reiterate, as of today, WHO has only received 30% of the $1.9 billion we asked for under the SPRP, with only 10% of the funds received that WHO needs to deliver on our work on the ACT Accelerator under SPRP. I urge member states to support this life-saving work. One part of that work is in the Health Systems Connector, which was established as a cross-cutting mechanism within the ACT Accelerator to address operational needs related to rapid and large-scale deployment of diagnostics, treatments, including oxygen, vaccines, and personal protective equipment. The Health Systems Connector is led by WHO, the Global Fund, and the World Bank. And today, you will hear more about it from Global Fund Executive Director Peter Sams and WHO Deputy Director General Susanna Jacob. Of course, WHO is not acting alone. Around the world, WHO is working closely with our partners in the United Nations system to deliver as one UN. Today, you'll be hearing from Peter Graf, the coordinator of the UN Crisis Management Team, on the progress of WHO's COVID-19 response coordination with UN partners. We're very grateful to Robert Piper, Assistant Secretary General for Development Coordination, and Rain Olsen, Director of Coordination Division at the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, for joining this session. The COVID-19 pandemic is a vivid demonstration of the immense power and value of vaccines. This is World Immunization Week. Even as COVID-19 vaccines are helping us to bring COVID-19 under control in some regions, the pandemic continues to severely disrupt immunization services around the world. New WHO data show that as a result of COVID-19, 60 immunization campaigns are currently suspended in 50 countries. That means about 228 million children are vulnerable to deadly vaccine-preventable diseases such as measles, yellow fever, and polio. Measles campaigns are the most affected, accounting for 23 of the postponed campaigns. many meetings campaigns have now been delayed for more than a year. In addition to target campaigns to prevent or respond to outbreaks, routine childhood immunization services were disrupted in more than a third of countries in the first quarter of 2021. Gaps in vaccination coverage are already having grave real-world consequences. Serious measles outbreaks have occurred in several countries, including the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Pakistan, and Yemen. And the risk of measles outbreaks is mounting elsewhere, as more and more children miss out on the vaccines they so urgently need. WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, and other partners are working with countries to ensure that immunization services are restored quickly and safely. But we must not forget that even before the COVID-19 pandemic, nearly 20 million children missed out on life-saving vaccines each year. We must not only get immunization back on track, but do better than before. This week, WHO, UNICEF, Gavi, and other partners launched the Immunization Agenda 2030, an ambitious global strategy to maximize the life-saving impact of vaccines. If fully implemented, the Immunization Agenda 2030 could avert over 50 million deaths over the next decade. 75% of them in low and lower middle-income countries. First, we call on world leaders and the global health and development community to make bold new commitments to advance this strategy. Second, we call on all countries to develop and implement national plans that align with Immunization Agenda 2030 and increase investments to make immunization accessible to all. Third, we call on donors and governments to increase investments in vaccine research, development, and delivery focused on the needs of underserved populations. And fourth, we call on the vaccine industry and scientists to continue to accelerate research and development, ensure a continuous supply of affordable vaccines to meet global needs, and apply lessons from COVID-19 to other diseases. As you know, science and research have always been the foundation of progress in public health and have always been central to WHO's mission and mandate as an evidence-based organization. This week saw the first meeting of the WHO Science Council, the latest step in our efforts to strengthen the standard of WHO scientific work. 2 years ago, as part of the WHO transformation, we established a new science division and appointed WHO's first chief scientist, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan. The Science Council brings together leading scientists from around the world to ensure WHO remains abreast of the latest scientific developments and to ensure the excellence, relevance, and efficacy of WHO's core technical functions. The Council has determined that the use of genomic technologies for the prevention, diagnosis, and treatment of diseases will be its first area of work. You will be hearing more on that in meetings to come. As always, we're grateful for your engagement and look forward to your questions and comments. I thank you. Until back.
Thank you, Thank you very much, Director General Tedros. And delegates, just to alert you that we have an additional agenda item, time permitting, this afternoon, following the technical and epidemiological update, a round of questions and answers, then an update on the ACT Accelerator and COVAX, a round of questions and answers. We have an opportunity to provide you an update on the partners platform. But with that, I would first like to go to Mr. Peter Graf, UN Crisis Management Team Coordinator, on the first agenda item, WHO COVID-19 response coordination with UN partners. Peter, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. If online, with your permission, allow my Brian to say a few words. He texted to me that he would like to come in. Mike, are you online? Sorry about that. Let me then just get started. He's on, okay.
Oh, sorry, Peter. Sorry, I wasn't being allowed to unmute. I had to be unmuted at your end. But I just wanted to welcome our UN colleagues today, but also to recognise the work that everyone has done within the UN system in this response. It's been a huge effort on everyone's part. And particularly thank you for your workers working with me as the UN Crisis Manager and you as the Crisis Coordinator, bringing together 23 UN agencies, and we look forward to hearing more about that. Dr. Sosi is there with you as well, and Maria McCarthy there to answer questions if there are any technical questions later. But just I'd like to say that through the last week, but this is the 9th consecutive week of increased cases, with nearly 5.7 million cases reported last week. The number of new deaths has increased for the 6th consecutive week. We've now over 87,000 deaths reported last week. You'll see that this is affecting many regions, but the main increases have been in Southeast Asia and Western Pacific, with steady or decreasing trends in the Americas, in Europe, and in the Eastern Mediterranean. India accounts for the vast majority of
that later on, but we have the global humanitarian response plan that was focusing on fragile states, a combination of ensuring a COVID response even under the most difficult of circumstances, but also to ensure that other life-saving health services would not be squashed in this process. We also have the UN socio-economic framework, and Robert will undoubtedly speak to that a bit more. which had a health component in it, but was really looking at the wider fallout, the wider implications of the pandemic in terms of economy, in terms of the fabric of society, etc. And what is straddling this is our WHO component to both, and we really aimed to ensure that the health response was there early on in an equitable manner to ensure that livelihoods were saved as well as lives. Next slide, please. Can you click more? Yeah. These planning frameworks have evolved. The socioeconomic framework is now very much looking at the opportunities that this collective approach will bring towards a building back better, or as Robert often says, building back greener opportunity for countries, and the role that we as a UN family will and can play in support of our member states. In the humanitarian sphere, the normal planning process took over for 2020, so the COVID components are now part of the HRPs. And the SPRP evolved as well, and in particular at the bottom right of this slide you will see the component where we see the Act A partnership rolling out access to commodities, and of course Susanna and Peter will talk to the transversal component therein, strengthening health system capacity to do so. What you also see on this slide is a large number of partners, and when we were adding up the ones working with us within the health sector, we stopped counting when we reached 1,300 partners globally at every level, global, regional, and country level. Next slide, please. The UN Crisis Management Team. So as I mentioned, this is the first time that the specialized agency is in charge of this mechanism that links the various entities that are concerned back to the leadership of our Secretary General. Very quickly after Dr. Tedros declared a fake on the 31st of January 2020, he requested the SG for activation of the crisis management team. And soon thereafter, on the 11th, we had the first meeting chaired by Mike Ryan as the global crisis manager. The aim of this group is to ensure that we are aligned, that everybody has the same information on the table, that we agree on priorities, and that where necessary, action is coordinated between the various agencies. The strong participation of both DCO, Robert Piper, and OCHA, Mark Lowcock, meant that this was also informing the other planning processes that I mentioned earlier. We have 23 participating entities, a large number of meetings, and I would like to draw attention to the last bullet point here, that our partner UNOCC during this period has provided 130 crisis updates to make sure that all UN entities are informed and aligned around our common purpose on this. And last but not least, a number of spin-off activities, so to speak, were triggered in the UNCMT. You heard last week about the COVID-19 supply chain system, which was born in the UNCMT but then created its own environment. But there was also a lot of work collectively, starting from the CMT, but later on led from New York on UN staff protection. Next slide, please. As an example, and you heard about this last week, so I'm not going to talk about content per se, but just to show that when it came to the COVID-19 supply chain system, there was, first of all, many partners within and outside the UN, that this process is very much driven by the epidemiological and operational intelligence coming from WHO. So an understanding how the outbreak, how the pandemic was moving, when there were limited supplies available, where would they be best put to use, where were the biggest needs, etc. So a very strong spin-off from the UNCMT. Moving on, next slide please, to the humanitarian sphere. The sort of in tandem with the UNCMT, the IASC started weekly principal meetings, co-chaired by Mark Lowcock and Sophie Fold sitting next to me here. A lot of guidance came out, a lot of work went into safeguarding that financing for COVID was secured, but that also financing for COVID wasn't going to eat into the financing for other life-saving activities. And most recently, a lot of work went into ensuring the availability and access and rollout of vaccines in humanitarian settings for people who would not be served under the national vaccine plans. The opportunity that is coming out of this, and that maybe Ryan or Sosa may want to talk to, is looking at possibilities to shock-proof, to ensure that countries in FCD settings are better prepared to come up with solutions, sustainable solutions for future shocks to their health systems. Next slide, please. One well-known component under the IAC is the Global Health Cluster. This one is led by WHO. We have 31 health clusters, 29 countries, 2 regional, total target audience of almost 84 million people. And the 3 examples that you see below shows how partners, both national and international, act in areas with great need, great vulnerability, and often difficult access. Next slide, please. A very new initiative, and one that is very close to my heart. If I remember what we were struggling with when we were facing Ebola in West Africa, and the fact that we had to learn there how important the community was for the response. This new initiative, the collective service, this partnership between UNICEF, IFRC, WHO, and the larger GORN network, building on local knowledge, ensuring a link up between communities who are in the lead and their national authorities to ensure that, let's say, risk communication and an engagement with the communities leads to the best possible response and understanding by us what communities are underpinning this work. And as we all know, information, the right information, countering misinformation is absolutely key to when it comes to our response. To the next slide, please. A long-standing instrument available to us and put to very good use, in my opinion, and again, Robert may want to talk to this, is the fact that we have UN country teams in 136 countries. UNDCO that Robert leads is sort of provides the overall supervision of this system that is led by the RCs and the HCs at country level. a very regular, initially weekly webinar was set up for all RCs, but not only for all RCs, for all RCs and the relevant entities of UN country teams. WHO systematically provides an epidemiological and sort of update in these meetings, and it helps drive a coherent response. And I have to say that having been an acting WR in one of the member states during this period, and having been a WR in other countries before, I really do see a change in the way health is central to the work of the UN country team. The importance of recognizing the convening power, the coordination power of the UNRCs, and the respect for WHO, but not only WHO, in terms of what we all bring to the table. So this is, the model was there, but I think the energy and impetus to maintain this type of collaboration is important. And this slide shows that in these webinars, we often see more than 800 or up to 800 participants. Actually, I do remember that at some point it was more than 1,000. And I think both when the SG and when our Director General spoke to this group, there was a very, 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 very strong attendance by a very large group. Next slide, please. And all of this, I think, and this slide shows the power of information and the power of working together. Having 176 countries with a COVID response plan, and so on and so forth. I mean, the fact that in priority countries we now have a multi-sectoral mental health and psychological support working group, and I can tell you that wasn't 53 out of the 64 when all of this started. And then last and not least on this slide, and you heard that hopefully you will have time to look at the partners platform, the fact that the 134 countries track regular actions, and that now 105 countries have uploaded their national vaccine plan onto this platform. And the platform is expanding. The platform is accessible to not only to member states, but also to donors and other parties. And Lucy will speak to this. It's a very, very rich tool. Next slide, please. So three points in terms of what this might all mean for the future. We think that we should maintain and build on these gains that we've made on this UN-wide three-level cohesion, both globally at UNCMT, nationally, the UNCTs, the IAC, but also at regional level between the various regional directors, a very intense collaboration, and it shows let's say the logic of health in not only for now, but more in general in terms of humanitarian development action. The fact that any action we undertake really should be driven by country needs, and that especially in times of let's say of limited capacity, that it's the epidemiology and our operational data that have to drive action on the ground. Secondly, we think that the UNCMT has proven to be functional, that we should continue to use this for future emergencies, and depending on what type of emergency we're talking about, of course it can be other organizations within the UN system leading it, and we would be very happy to support them also in the setup of this. And then last but not least, when it comes to the UN support to EU member states at country level, when we start pulling out of this pandemic, and a lot of action needs to be taken to build back and the Build Back Better, or sometimes mentioned as Build Back Greener, opportunity for us to work tightly knitted, integrated UN system for your immediate short-term and long-term needs. Next slide, please. And then my very final slide, once again, a big thank you to all the partners inside and outside the UN. The continued engagement of all at often very, very senior level, but a very special shout out to two groups. First of all, UNICEF and WFP, who actually embedded staff with us here in Geneva, and that has been extremely useful for our collective action. And last but not least, UNOCC, who co-led the secretariat of the UNCMT and did a sterling work in getting information out to all. And with that, I'd like to hand back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Peter, for Assistant Secretary General for Development Coordination at the UN Development Coordination Office. Mr. Piper, I give the floor to you, sir, and welcome you to the meeting, and thank you again for giving such an early hour for you.
Thanks very much, Mike. Do you hear me okay before I begin?
We can hear you fine, thank you.
Great. Well, good. It's early, but for WHO, anything at this point. And let me start there, because I really think as a 30-plus year UN official, let me just acknowledge the tremendous work that WHO has been doing over the last 18 months in this pandemic. We've been very proud of WHO and very happy to work under WHO's leadership. So I hope as member states, you derive the same kind of pride that we do as sisters and brothers of WHO within the system. I've been asked to be brief. I'm going to be 5 minutes or so, just to add a bit of texture to Peter's really comprehensive presentation on the way the system has come together on coordination. So let me just reinforce that really at the global level, the system came together like it never has before. The Secretary General has taken a very visible role, the Deputy Secretary General, alongside, of course, the Director General of WHO, whether it's the ACT Accelerator, whether it's the question of debt and financing for the recovery, whether it's on the very many different dimensions of the impact of the COVID crisis on disability, on the elderly, on gender. Our Secretary General, our really executive leadership has been extremely. The International Maritime Organization was there when we had tens of thousands of seafarer, workers who were stuck, unable to get on ships. And really, all of the different dimensions of the crisis were seen at the crisis management team, and that enabled us really to anticipate and get organized and support governments much better. The CMT was also, the crisis management team, was of course the place where it became very obvious very quickly that the non-health dimensions of the COVID crisis were going to be enormous. We saw countries already feeling the impact of the COVID crisis in their economies, in their labour market, before a single sort of case of positive COVID diagnosis. So this became clear this was much larger than health. The Deputy Secretary General, given this perspective, commissioned a socio-economic response strategy to look at the longer-term non-COVID, non-health consequences of this COVID crisis. I met with UNDP counterpart
pulling together of a socioeconomic response plan at the global level for the UN development system to complement the emergency response, to complement the health COVID response that Peter has described, in which you are very, very familiar. In less than 1 month, we pulled together the socioeconomic strategy, and it focused on 5 key pillars and it remains affecting those non-COVID essential health services that the DG was talking about, vaccines for measles and so forth. Number 2, protecting key social services, whether it was social protection, safety net systems that needed to be either protected or created and activated, whether it was around education for kids, whether it was water and sanitation. The third pillar was around protecting the economy and jobs and planning for a rapid recovery as soon as possible. The fourth pillar was support to macroeconomic stability, and the fifth was a very important pillar around promoting social cohesion and community resilience, because we knew early on both that this crisis would put great stresses on our sort of social capital, our social and community organisations on the one hand, and on the other hand, that the long-term recovery would depend on the community, ultimately early warning, the rapid response and outbreaks and so forth. So we mobilised around these 5 pillars, the whole UN development system, working under the Deputy Secretary General's ultimate leadership, put together plans, rolled out guidance to our 131 country teams that service 162 countries and territories from 131 locations. And within less than 4 months, we essentially had socioeconomic recovery plans for almost every single country under the planet. Many of them developed with the international financial institutions also as very much a part. We have just pulled together our results for last year, for the 2020 results for this socioeconomic response. So the first 9 months of what is going to be a multi-year operation, unfortunately, and to give you a sense of the speed and scale of the development systems response. When it comes to that first pillar of essential non-COVID health services, our teams have reached over 250 million people under this COVID operation. Under the pillar of social services, different parts of the operation have now reached collectively over 120 million beneficiaries around our social protection and service delivery. When it comes to the economy and jobs, we've supported almost 400,000 companies, many of them small and medium-sized companies, to help accompany them through this crisis. And around that social cohesion and community resilience, so far we've registered more than 25,000 community organisations with whom different agencies have worked. This in 9 months only, a really vast scale, largely driven by the repurposing of about $3 billion of our existing resources that were quickly repurposed for this crisis response, and another $2 billion in additional resources we've received from governments, many of whom are around the virtual table today. At the country level, this has all come together under our 131 resident coordinators who lead the UN country teams, as Peter said, servicing 162 countries and territories. Bearing in mind that these resident coordinators are also the humanitarian coordinators in, I think, 30 locations. So they really have been, at the operational, at the field level, very much the pivot point between those three strategies that you have spoken about. So our resident coordinators have mobilized the full UN country team to come in behind WHO and ministries of health to support the COVID response, whether it's on logistics, on awareness raising, on the legal sides of vaccination. The whole team has come in to support WHO. RCs have obviously, because they're humanitarian coordinators and with the support of OCHA, mobilized the team on the humanitarian response that we'll be hearing more about in a moment. RCs have really mobilized, obviously, to lead on the socio-economic response, along with UNDP, that has played a very important role. And resident coordinators have also mobilized to lead our duty of care to UN staff. And this has been very, very time-consuming, but very important, whether it's on medivac systems, whether it's on what we call the first line of defense, but also on business continuity. We have managed to keep UN operations going throughout this crisis without pause, and this has required a huge amount of coordination at the field level and at the headquarters level, and a lot of creative work. We have seen how the reforms to the UN development system have really paid off in this year, even though this was a crisis no one would wish on anybody. We have new leadership, full-time leadership in our resident coordinators. We have resident coordinators offices around the world now with 5 professionals. One of the big developments is we have an economist in every single resident coordinator's office. So 131 economists that were amongst the very first to really advocate for looking at the economic impact of the economic crisis. We have a new development coordination office, my office, to support these. And everyone coming together under new instruments, new planning instruments, and a new culture, I think, of a UN system working together. So to finish, many firsts, I will mention just a few of them and close. Firstly, I think first in terms of the programmatic results from the whole UN system, the numbers I gave you then is the first time we have ever managed to pull together a system-wide programmatic results story. We need to repeat it for the SDGs, but COVID has been a very good test case in how do we draw on all of the aspects of the UN system and tell an aggregated system-wide story of what the UN has done. It's been a tremendous first case. Secondly, is our duty of care to staff, our business continuity work, is the first time ever we have come together in this, again, whole system way. Peacekeepers, development, humanitarian, human rights, the whole spectrum of the system came together under one medivac system, under one vaccine now system for staff. I think number 3, the work that Peter talked about around supply chain, and very importantly, we've forgotten WFP's work on travel and air transport was crucial at the beginning of the crisis when a lot of airlines were stopping their work in allowing us to have a global system. Number 4, I would finish with that socioeconomic wide operational leadership, where WHO has provided that technical leadership to the entire system and maintained that underlying a health dimension of our operations. And let me finish on there, because we need to capture that experience, whether it is on the socioeconomic determinants of health, whether it is on the Global Action Plan for Healthy Lives. It needs the UN health system to come in behind it, because this is so much bigger than simply health. And I think for the COVID crisis has demonstrated that. It's demonstrated that the UN development system can come together behind a health-driven crisis, and it has demonstrated that it's good for WHO too to benefit from that kind of support. Back to you in Geneva. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robert, for that intervention. Now, my pleasure to introduce Mr. Red Paulson, Director of Coordination Division, the UN Office for Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Mr. Paulson, the floor is yours.
Opportunity to speak, and thank you, WHO, for the opportunity to participate in this discussion, which we do with great pleasure. I'd like to share a few comments, if I may, on behalf of the Emergency Relief Coordinator and Under Secretary General of OCHA, Mr. Mark Lowcock, and start in the first place by strongly echoing the sentiments that Robert expressed of deep appreciation and thanks for the indispensable central pivotal role that WHO has played throughout our collective response to the pandemic. So with your permission, and I am conscious of time, just a few comments on aspects of system-wide coordination and what's worked and what we've learned in complement to information that Peter and Robert have already shared, and a couple of comments then also on the way in which we're evolving our collective humanitarian response to address not just the immediate health impacts, but also these very substantial ripple impacts, secondary consequences, urgent secondary consequences of the COVID pandemic. So first, on the system-wide coordination side, I think it's fair to say that the tragedy of the COVID-19 pandemic has brought out the very best of the UN system, and indeed the best of the wider humanitarian system in terms of collaboration, ability to mobilize resources, efforts, assets quickly in support of governments and focus on the most vulnerable populations. And so much of that has been done, in fact, building on existing structures and tools, tweaking those, nuancing them, and adding new elements where that became necessary. Just to focus on the ISC side, one of the slides that Peter showed before gave a very good visual representation of how the different frameworks come seamlessly together in support of affected populations. On the ISC side, the Interagency Standing Committee side, the principal leaders, the heads of agencies and members within that group activated what are called system-wide scale-up protocols. And that was done in April last year and was unprecedented in scope. The first time that a global emergency activation had been undertaken. And it feels like a number of the things we're talking about today, and I'll also make some comments about, really are groundbreaking in terms of what they represent for our ways of working, and have been, I think, very successful in that regard also. So the intention with these scale-up protocols was to enable fast-tracking of internal procedures, fast-tracking of administrative procedures, all with the intention of mobilizing a flexible response, flexible delivery of aid, field support where that was required. So this was something that was done immediately in response to declaration of the situation of concern that we've heard reference to already. Robert mentioned that there's many things that could be touched on, but I do think it's important just to give a sense of the scale and the scope of what we've been able to achieve collectively together under the leadership on the health side of WHO. The reference made to this unprecedented logistics operation, I think, is worth underscoring. So the Interagency Standing Committee with the World Food Programme at the front front in this regard, led what we think is the largest UN-led logistics operation in support of common services. And I should stress this isn't then just about enabling the United Nations operation. It was also critically about enabling the operation of frontline responders, non-governmental organizations as well. Just to give you a sense of the scale, in this first year of response, but particularly at the front end of the response, more than 21,100 frontline humanitarian responders were mobilized at times when no other avenues, channels, and opportunities were available. So that's staff from nearly 340 organizations, 45% of whom were NGOs. In addition to the logistics operations, reference was made to the way in which, on an interagency basis, we were able to provide important and timely operational guidance in support of countries and operational agencies to deliver the response. There were some 18 pieces of critical operational guidance provided in a very short space of time, dealing with questions such as interim guidance on public health and social measures for COVID-19, preparedness and response in low capacity and humanitarian settings, practical guidance to enable a response. The response to the COVID-19 pandemic also opened the door, as we reflect on the way in which we mobilized, to strengthen collaboration with a number of actors that on the humanitarian side there wasn't necessarily always as consistent engagement with. So some really important collaborations, partnerships strengthened with the Vaccine Alliance Gavi, with the Gates Foundation, focused on equitable distribution of vaccines to affected populations. Innovations put in place, the development and creation of the COVAX humanitarian to ensure that a certain percentage, 5% of COVID-19 vaccine doses procured through the COVAX facility are reserved as a backup and a stock for last resort to deal with requirements of the world's most vulnerable populations. These are the types of innovations that the interagency effort, again under WHO's leadership, was able to deliver. On the global humanitarian response plan itself, and just in complement to some of the results and numbers that Robert just shared on the socioeconomic response, this plan again was unprecedented in terms of scope and scale. By its final iteration, covered 63 countries and was requesting nearly $10 billion worth of resources, against which donors generously provided almost $4 billion worth of resources, most of which came very quickly after the initial appeal was launched. In addition to the importance of the amount of funding, I think it's very important to underscore just how much appreciation there is for the flexible and unearmarked nature of a majority of the funding that came through. That the flexibility that was enabled by the nature of the financing provided was indispensable to the humanitarian community's swift and nimble response to the COVID-19 pandemic. I should flag, for example, with appreciation the nearly $500 million that came into the Central Emergency Response Fund and the country-based pooled funds, all of which has been programmed efficiently during the course of our collective response. Some headline numbers, if I may, and I would point participants, if you haven't already seen it, to the 22nd of February final global humanitarian response plan for the COVID-19 response report, which is online. Maybe just 3 or 4 key data points from that to give a sense of what was achieved with your support. More than 130 million children in the most vulnerable contexts and communities around the world supported with people at least supported with critical water and sanitation and hygiene supplies and services, and more than 60 million people with direct and livelihood support. And again, these are populations who are normally the focus of ongoing humanitarian response operations, so represent really some of those left furthest behind. 24 million women and adolescents supported with reproductive health services as part of the interagency, intersectoral COVID response. I think Peter may have mentioned this, but looking now into, as we've looked into 2021, a decision was taken to ensure that we have then this full coherence between the ongoing health response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the intersectoral response. On the humanitarian side, there is no standalone GHRP that's been sustained in 2021. All of those requirements for UN agencies and partners have been folded into the GHO, the Global Humanitarian Overview for 2021, the details of which I'm sure everyone has seen separately. So just maybe 3 or 4 final comments in the interest of time. The Interagency Standing Committee will continue its focus in complement to the health response on addressing the secondary impacts of COVID-19, particularly in low resource and humanitarian context. Important to signal that attention to COVID-19 has compromised the ability to deliver on important other health services, and certainly on OCHA's side. Just want to echo one of the initial calls that the Director General made at the top of our discussion today, just how important it is to ensure that while we deliver on critical COVID-19 vaccination campaigns, redoubling efforts in that regard, that funds and attention is not diverted away from other critical health needs in emergency contexts, including routine immunizations. We'll also be continuing to work with donors to scale up humanitarian pool funds to provide timely and effective response funding to frontline humanitarian operations as we move into the year. A lot more that could be said, but maybe just one final comment in terms of priorities and attention. We often focus on funding resource requirements, and that's indispensable. We're also reminded of just how important it is to focus collective efforts on attention to improving access to vulnerable communities and vulnerable populations. We had 169 security incidents against humanitarian workers last year in 19 countries, just as one indicator of some of the challenges we face collectively as we deliver the interagency response to the pandemic and the ripple effect. So securing unimpeded humanitarian access remains a priority, and all of your support to ensuring that happens is deeply appreciated. I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman, and hand back to you at that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Paulson, Mr. Piper, and Peter Graf here in WHO headquarters for that presentation. I did indicate earlier that we would have a round of question and answers now. However, given the time, I'm proposing we'll go to straight to the next agenda item, and then we'll have a round of one round of questions when time permits before the end of the session. So, with that, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Shoshana Yakab, the WHO Deputy Director General, for an update on Health Systems Connector, I can't say that right. I won't even try again. DV, you have the floor. I apologise, colleagues.
Thank you very much, Tim, and dear member states, dear representatives. The next item is about the Health System Connector and how we operationalize it in 2021. As you may know from previous discussions, the Health System Connector is co-led by 3 agencies: the Global Fund, the World Bank, and WHO. And therefore the aim is to share this presentation. Mohamed Ate, the Global Director of Health, Nutrition, Population of the World Bank, unfortunately is not able to join us today, but he asked us that we share his presentation, his part of the presentation with Peter Sand. And Mohamed Pate is represented here in the meeting by Feng Zhao, who is the practice manager, strategy operations and global engagement of the World Bank, and he's at our disposal to respond to some questions. So in order to save time, I would like to pass the floor right away to Peter Sand, Executive Director of the Global Fund, who was with us until recently, maybe he had to check out if he is not connected to the meeting anymore, because we were going to start it earlier, this agenda item at 1 o'clock. So can you please check if he is online? If not, then I will make the presentation on behalf of the three of us and the apologies for their colleagues. So if I can have the next slide, please. In 2020, next slide, please. In 2020, the Health System Connector made significant progress to identify the gaps in the health systems, to improve country readiness for deployment of the tools, and to create knowledge-sharing platforms and develop guidance and tools. Next slide, please. This is still work in progress, which helped us to identify health system bottlenecks across the 7 work streams of the Health System Connector roadmap. Next slide, please. And within each of the 7 work streams, it helped us also to identify the 3 highest priorities, and you can see them on the slide. Of course, we will distribute the slides to all of you. This is being now validated continuously with our country staff as well as with the regions to make sure that they reflect the real needs of the individual countries. And when I say country staff, I have in mind all the country staff we have in the countries, including the UN Crisis Management Coordination team. And I'm very pleased that this presentation now comes after the previous presentation, where we had an opportunity to explain to you again and again what this crisis management team is doing. Next slide, please. We have also made a deep dive to rethink the PPE. We stimulated research and innovation and reinforced the evidence. We also reviewed manufacturing, procurement, and quality assurance of the supplies, and we ensured training and guidance and safe disposal. Next slide, please. Different surveys that have been conducted by many partners, including WHO, show that still considerable challenges remain at the country level, like, for example, challenges that are linked to the rolling out of the guidelines, shortage of products, scaling up of testing capacities, or there are challenges linked to the country readiness, like training of the vaccinators in many countries have not taken place, or social mobilization or public engagement strategies have not been put in place that can generate confidence, acceptance, and demand, for example, for vaccines. Next slide. In 2021, the primary objective of the Health System Connector is to enable the delivery and effective deployment of the COVID-19 tools, and you can see the figures on the slide, and therefore I do not need to repeat these figures. Oh, Peter. But this was his part. So, moving on to achieve these objectives, we identified 4 priorities for the health system connector in 2021. First, a full integration at the country level of the pillars and the COVID response. Secondly, a rapid scale-up of delivery of COVID-19 tools and country readiness to accommodate them. Third, to speed up the availability and the use of PPE. And fourth, to ensure delivery of essential health services and strengthening of the health systems. Next slide, please. And the next slide, please. As this new phase of the health system connector shifts to the country level, we have to ensure first an increased uptake of the new tools in the countries by supporting them with standards, tools and guidance prepared for the deployment. Secondly, also supporting countries in accessing external financing. Thirdly, more integration and coordination between the pillars of ACTA and the health system connector. And fourthly, transparency in uptake and COVID-19 tools in the countries. Overall, we have to address the gaps and the bottlenecks at the country level. Next slide. We made every effort to align ACTA and SPRP for increased country impact. The 2021 version of the SPRP builds upon the experience that was acquired in 2020 and has additional pillars to integrate vaccination, essential health services and research, as you can see on the right table. Next slide. With respect to the health system connector, this slide well illustrates the functional alignment of the 7 work streams of the health system connector roadmap with the 9 out of the 11 SPRP pillars. In order to save time, I will not go into this, but happy to respond to any questions as needed in moving forward. Next slide, please. As we discussed it many times, the pandemic has been very disruptive to health services. In the recent Pulse survey that was published last week, the majority of the countries are still experiencing disruptions of at least 25% of their services. However, there are some good signs also. There are some signs of recovery, as the number of countries reporting 75% or more disruptions is decreasing. It went down from 24% to 8% in the last 6 months. Next slide, please. In order to drive country impact, we need to have a continuous cycle of integrated planning at the country level, identification of country needs, technical support, capacity and financing, and all this at the country level. This work has to be adapted to the needs of the individual countries. Therefore, needs assessment has to continue. Existing guidelines tools need to be rolled out. For example, we have ready-made guidelines for health financing tools and a number of training and capacity building good practices, health facilities readiness assessments, and And yesterday, in our discussion with some country representatives, we were very pleased to note that they confirmed the priority list presented on the slide 4 earlier on, and also added some new priorities which we also have to address. And we have to continue to work with the regions and the country offices, country staff present on the ground in all the agencies, including the UN Crisis Management Team, as I referred to before. And I'm very happy in this regard that within WHO, Peter Graf connects the two parts, the health system connector and also the UN Crisis Management Team. So the next slide, which is the last one on my side, finally there are several funding opportunities for the countries which have to be used in the most efficient way, but needs are huge and additional funding for the short and more medium and long-term work is very welcome, and big thanks to those countries who already provide generous financial support to this work. And with this, let me turn to Peter Sands, who I understand joined us in the meantime. Apologies, Peter, but I had to start due to the shortness of time. Let me turn it to you and to ask you if you would like to take the floor at this moment. Over to you, Peter.
I don't have much to add except to highlight the fact that for Global Fund eligible countries, the C19RM funding mechanism that is in the top right hand corner of this slide is open for funding requests. Countries have received their base and above base allocation sums on April 7th. Fast track for commodity procurement opened on the same date. The first window for full submissions is May the 14th. I would encourage all of you who are representatives of Global Fund eligible countries to check that your country coordinating mechanisms are moving swiftly to prepare funding requests. We are keen to see fast-track funding requests, which we will turn around as quickly as possible. These cover both core health systems elements, as Susanna has described, but also diagnostics and therapeutics. Basically, everything in the COVID response except vaccines. They also cover mitigation actions to protect HIV, TB, and malaria services. So that's all I would add, Susanna. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you for reminding us. And we use every opportunity where we reach out to our WRs and regional representatives to remind them of these deadlines, because this is a significant development and member states have to make full use of this. Thank you, Peter, and apologies for being late and to keep you waiting. Back to the chair.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Sands, and thank you very much, DDG, for that. We have now one final very brief intervention before turning over to member states for any questions. Now I'd like to introduce Dr. Lucy Bollinger for an update on the Partners Platform. Lucy, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, colleagues, and thank you, DDG, for providing this opportunity to share an update on the Partners Platform. The platform was
launched over a year ago in collaboration with UNDCO, with great thanks to Robert Piper for rolling it out through the UN country teams. The platform provides, for the first time, a digital space for governments, UN entities, partners, and donors to come together in one digital space to share plans, to request resources when domestic resources are not available, and to track contributions. This is the landing page of the Partners platform. It is not open to the public. It does require registration, and it's hosted in a secure WHO environment. Because of that, I'm going to move over to a demonstration site so that I don't share country information. I'm going to be moving first to the country information page in the demonstration site. The Partners platform is country-centered. It gives the power to the countries to share the information they want with all of the stakeholders. And we thank the 150 countries that have engaged on the Partners platform in 2020, sharing information with the 1,000 partners that are also on the platform. And we invite any countries that have not engaged on the platform to do so with us this year in 2021 as we roll out the SPRP 2021. So as you can see here on this country info page, you first select the country that you are in, as every country has a page, and this is the repository of plans. You can see here under this folder all national response plans. Over 120 countries have shared their plans, as well as the national vaccination plans. We have over 106 countries sharing their plans here, as well as other partner contribution documents. And you can see here that we have in 2020 World Bank pads and could be a repository also of Global Fund C19RM plans at country level. And as well, there are interaction reviews hosted and other review documents. Next, the countries can also participate in showing information on what activities they're tracking and implementing in countries. So it's based on the public health pillars, the technical pillars. You can see here that any country can open up a checklist and go ahead and update for all stakeholders to see what actions they're implementing that are based on the summary of guidance published by WHO in the past year. The third function is for countries to be able to update any resource needs they have for technical assistance, financial needs, as well as supplies. And that is done pillar by pillar, including needs for vaccination implementation. And next, we have the resource tracking of contributions, where we have, this is not real data, but we do have nearly 80 donors contributing towards the response in 2020, and for a total of just over $9 billion is being tracked in contributions. And I will show you here on the dashboard. We also have approximately $9 billion in resource needs that have been uploaded into the platform by countries. And what that allows is, although it's not a transactional platform, we are not linking every resource need with every contribution. What it does allow is for stakeholders to be able to see country by country the resource needs, the contributions, and then identify the priority gaps. Where are those countries in the world that have not received their needs to be met, and have especially received less than 25% of their requested needs? We also have a dashboard to identify and
track the vaccination contributions. We have here uploaded Gavi data now, and coming on board in the next week will be World Bank data and hopefully Global Fund allocation data as well. So WHO is inviting all countries now to update their 2021 plans in the repository of plans, and to also update any resource needs throughout all the technical pillars of response aligned with 2021 SPRP. Thank you very much. Back over to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for that presentation. Given the time, I will now go straight to our moderator, Mr. Jude Osai from the Department of Governing Bodies, to take any questions or comments we have from the many presentations this morning. I will ask member states to be as brief as possible you can be in your questions, and the same for the Secretariat in your responses. Over to you, Jude.
Thank you very much, Chair. I recognize Germany. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Jude, and thanks for the... I would have a question concerning the joint UN response, and indeed, from a member state perspective, I can confirm that we're very pleased and that we think that this will really come out as a positive best practice and lesson learned out of this COVID-19 experience. Thanks so much for your tremendous efforts. If anything, I would have a question to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the link between the ACT Accelerator and the UNCMT/IASC and other coordination mechanisms. As a concrete example, and that has been mentioned also, I would like to mention the humanitarian buffer, which Germany is interested in supporting. We of course have good contacts with all partners on this, but there's still some questions remaining. Of course, I understand that coordination is a process. I also understand that in many humanitarian settings, there are much greater issues than the COVID-19 vaccines. And also understand that around the vaccine equity, we have many other challenges, which Germany is trying to help addressing in being the second biggest donor to the ACT Accelerator now. And we'd be happy to become the third or fourth largest donor, because by then the ACT Accelerator will be fully funded, as well as by engaging in discussions around dose sharing and technology transfer. So to come back, just a question to elaborate on the link between ACT Accelerator and the coordination mechanisms with a view to the buffer especially. Thank you.
Information so that we can follow what is happening in capitals. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Merci. The floor. First of all, let me say that I'm very grateful to the presenters for the wealth of information they've given us in their statements this morning. Very helpful because now but from other countries as well. Thank you very much. What I wanted to ask specifically is this. Is distribution of vaccine and treatments against COVID-19 being distributed worldwide? We in Burundi have been trying to do screening, for example, and testing, but sometimes we just don't have the necessary technology and equipment to do that. So please do think about those countries that have this kind of an issue and therefore cannot do screening and testing as they would like to do. Thank you.
Already that concludes the intervention from Member States. Chair, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Jude, and thank you very much, Member States, for those questions and comments. And thank you for those comments in relationship to the size of the agenda today and the amount of time available for these discussions, which we recognise are very important. We will review the situation and try and ensure that in future weeks we allow adequate time to have consultations engagement in an appropriate manner. I am going to give the floor to the Secretariat, despite it is 2 o'clock. I recognise that many of us need to move to the Working Group for Sustainable Financing meeting. I will therefore ask that the responses from the Secretariat be as concise as possible, and that on issues where bilateral follow-up with the Member States could be undertaken, you also consider that. I first give the floor to DDG. Susanna, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tim. Before I reply to the questions that were raised in connection with the health system connector, I would like to check if Peter or Fenjao are online or not, so that they have an opportunity to reply. Can you please advise? Peter is online. Peter, would you like to pick up on any of these issues, please?
Just very briefly, Susanna, thank you very much. I just want to respond actually to the last 2 interventions from Zambia and Burundi. For Zambia, the base allocation under the C19RM is 47.3 million US dollars. We are in a position to buy commodities such as PPE, diagnostics, therapeutic. So I would encourage you to connect with the company mechanism. We are very happy to receive fast track requests. Burundi, I would make the same point in that we are in a position to provide diagnostic equipment, lab equipment for surveillance, and the base allocation for Burundi is 17.8 million US dollars, and we are very keen to receive fast track applications. I realize there were a set of broader questions from other participants here around the role and coordination of the health systems connected with the rest of the UN system. I'll probably defer those to Susanna, if that's okay for you, Susanna, because I'm afraid I have to leave now.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you for being with us. There were 2 issues raised by UK and Canada also about the coordinated approach between domestic and international funding. Indeed, there is a coordination among the resources. So, for example, the workforce for search capacity is funded from domestic resources. There is no funding foreseen from international sources for that. However, for technical cooperation to the countries, support to the countries, member states can apply for international funding, and the funding sources you saw on the last slide. And also, we are receiving some additional grants from member states, and we are extremely grateful, for example, to Canada for the 2 grants that they have provided for the short term and the more medium term health system connector investment and investment into the health systems. On the UN coordination, of course, our country offices are working very closely with the UN coordination mechanism, but in order to save time, I will pass it on to the colleagues who are sitting here with me because they have a lot of issues to reply to. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, let me start. Thank you all for the insightful questions. First of all, in terms of the validity of all this at country level, I gave a glimpse of the fact that actually I did spend quite a bit of time over the last year at country level as an acting WR in Afghanistan, and so could see the benefits of the collective work and a very different posture of the various parts of the UN in support of government. So I do think that we are in a different state now than we were before, and we need to keep this. In terms of the comments, the questions from Germany, first of all, big thank you for the support for the humanitarian buffer. We were very worried in country what was going to happen with the many internally displaced people living in parts of the country not under control of government, etc. And it's very good to have a tool that, if all else fails, can be tapped into. The link between ACT and the CMT, actually, I think it should be the link between ACT and the UNCT. Yeah. So if we look at what ACT is doing, ACT is helping ensure that we have the means available to support member states in terms of rolling out the key parts of the response, and that the different UN entities play their role therein. The ACT is now by far the single biggest component of the SPRP, and therefore it has to be reflected in full in country planning. And I think Susanna made a reference to that where your national plans haven't been updated recently, please do so urgently and make sure they end up on the platform. The question around capturing the lessons learned, actually integral in the activation of a crisis management team by the UN is a formal lessons learned at the end of the process. So, and in that, cognizant of the comment made by France about the communication on the meetings or the lack thereof to a wider audience, we will definitely make sure that these sentiments are reflected in such a formal lessons learned process, and that of course the outcome thereof is shared widely. With that, I would like to hand the floor to my colleague Sosifal to talk a bit more about India, etc.
Thank you very much, Victor. We have a number of questions from France, so I'm going to respond in français. Bien sûr. Merci.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the partnership platform. This is transparency and coordination, because everything is available. With the country plans, we can see the contributions being made by the various partners and the outcomes, and this, I think, is a model that should be continued in the future, especially when we're preparing for emergencies. It helps everybody to know where countries stand in terms of financing appropriations and in terms of implementing health security plans. Turning to the support WHO is providing to India, it goes without saying that we attach the highest possible priority to this. We have set up incident management teams, and we have a group working directly with the Indian authorities and the relevant regional office to try and provide direct technical support. We're also, of course, trying to make contributions in terms of oxygen supplies. 4,000 oxygen concentrators and other equipment are being sent. We're working with all our partners to make sure that whatever we do is properly coordinated. And we are looking at the impact that the circulation of variants may be having in India. There are several, and we really do need to understand what effect they are having on the spread of COVID-19. On remdesivir, we have not recommended its use. As you know, India is reserving remdesivir for clinical trials in hospitals, but the recommendation that WHO has made with respect to its use is crystal clear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sose, for that intervention. And now I'd like to hand the floor to Dr. Lucy Wallinger for a couple of quick comments, if I may, in relationship to the Partners Platform. And thank you again, membership, for indulging us with going over time. Lucy, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. And if I understood correctly, some of the questions are on the engagement of the countries and stakeholders, especially at the ground level. There are 149 countries engaged on the platform currently. There are, of those 149, 120 have shared plans, including 106 national vaccination plans as well. 106 of the countries have been actively assessing the checklist of priority actions based on WHO guidance, and 90 countries have uploaded resource requests. And the information on the platform is crowdsourced, so it is coming from the ground up, and we also have many shared stories on the landing page from stakeholders on the ground, and they're relating their interactions on the platform. As well, for the questions on registering for the Partners Platform, there are several avenues to do that. One is you can contact the WR at the country office to identify a country administrative user for your country. We'll go through a validation process because we want to make sure the right people are the ones the government is requesting be those that upload data. You can also contact me if you'd like, and I can facilitate that for you. Thank you. Over.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. And thank you very much again to all the contributors today, all the comments. Of course, the presentations will be made available, and again, for indulging us with the time. I look forward to seeing you momentarily back in the working group on sustainable financing. Thank you again, Member States, and we shall see you next week. Have a good evening, afternoon, and early morning, wherever you are in the world.